Right, time to talk to the government. Delighted to say that we're joined now by the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander. She joins us live from Scunthorpe. Let's start there if we can. Good morning to you, Minister. Tell us why you are where you are.
So I'm here today at British Steel in Scunthorpe because it's a really important moment. Network Rail are signing a 5-year contract with British Steel for the supply of steel rails. It's going to amount to 337,000 tonnes worth of rail over the next 5 years, a contract that's worth about £500 million. And this obviously secures the jobs and livelihoods of thousands of people at this plant. Your viewers will remember that it was only 2 months ago that the government passed emergency legislation to make sure that we could step in and ensure that the blast furnaces were still operating here. We passed that emergency legislation so that we could continue to order the raw materials that were necessary for the blast furnaces, continue to pay staff here. And so I think this really transforms the outlook for British Steel, securing those jobs. It's also really important for investment in our railways. We need to be making sure that we've got good quality steel so that we can maintain and renew our existing infrastructure, but also invest in the rail infrastructure of the future. We're obviously building HS2 between London and Birmingham. That's going to be really important in terms of driving economic growth between those big cities. And so this is about supporting our industrial heartlands, but it's also about making sure that we've got a railway fit for the future. And both of those things are vitally important for this Labour government's plan for change.
I'm fascinated, Minister, by what exactly you mean by secures the jobs of the workers there. And I looked through the press release and it had comments from you and from the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds. And it was that phraseology that was used but wasn't really expanded on because, of course, the context is a standoff between the government, who have taken control of the blast furnaces, and Jingyi, the Chinese firm that owns British Steel. And we, until now, as far as I know, don't have a resolution on that standoff as to whether the government needs to fully nationalise the plant, whether Jingyi says, yes, we're happy to keep supporting this, or whether a private buyer comes in. Are you solving that problem today as well?
So the work that my colleague, the Business and Trade Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, is doing is ongoing in this respect, because clearly we want a sustainable future for this plant and the thousands of people who work here. We do think that the future of the Scunthorpe steel plant is as part of a commercially operated business with private investment. We're talking to a number of third parties about that at the moment. No options off the table. We cannot be a country which doesn't have the ability to manufacture and produce primary steel. If those blast furnaces had been allowed to go a couple of months ago, which was a real and imminent threat at that point in time, we would have been the only country in the G20 that didn't have the ability to manufacture steel. And I think if we cast our minds back to what happened during COVID with supply chains, we know that being resilient as an economy is really important. It's critical to our industrial heartlands and the people who have jobs here, their families whose livelihoods depend upon it. But I see this contract today that we're signing between Network Rail and British Steel as a win-win. We all know that the steel that's produced here is very high quality, and as a country, we don't want to be having to import steel from around the world, the costs associated with that, the environmental consequences of that as well. And so this is a critically important moment for the future of the steel works here and all of the people who work here.
It might well be a win-win, and it's certainly not bad news for the workers of those blast furnaces behind you. But can you say that it has secured their jobs when there's no resolution yet to who owns the company they work for?
So this is a really important step to ensuring that British Steel has got a strong order book going forward. Network Rail is one of the primary customers of the steelworks here, and in the past we've seen extensions to contracts, not this 5-year deal with a big sort of vote of confidence up front about the amount of steel that Network Rail are going to be buying from this plant here. And so obviously there's more to do. Your viewers will have seen the news overnight of the trade deal that has been signed between the President of the US and our Prime Minister over at the G7 in Canada. Obviously there was some good news in there around car manufacturing and aerospace and the tariffs for those two sectors. We're still working at pace to make sure that we can address the issues of tariffs for the steel industry as well, for those businesses that are exporting to the US. Of course, we're already in quite a good position on that because unlike other countries globally that have been affected by this 50% tariff that Donald Trump has applied to steel imports from other countries, we already have a lower tariff on steel exports to the US. We want to go further with that, and that's the work that my colleagues in the Department for Business and Trade are working on at the moment, and we're determined to deliver.
Well, and of course, I was going to come on to the trade deal. I mean, the fact that we still have those elevated tariffs of 25% on steel must be seen as bad news relative to the better news on the National Rail deal by the workers behind you. And again, it just brings me back to the main point. It makes it pretty impossible to solve the long-term question of who employs those people while those tariffs remain in place.
So, as I said in the answer to your previous question, we're already in a better place than every single other country in the world when it comes to the tariffs on steel going into the US. I was talking to some of the workers here this morning, just in the last couple of minutes as I've arrived, and, I really got the sense that there was a lot of relief about the action that the government took a couple of months ago, and that there's, real enthusiasm about this very significant and very large contract that has now been signed with Network Rail. I'm not pretending that there isn't more to do. Of course there's more to do to ensure that we lock down the security of this plant going forward. But I do know that this government will be straining every sinew to make sure that that happens in the weeks and months ahead.